Small towns have a charm of their own, serene landscapes, close-knit communities, and a slower pace of life. But beneath their tranquil surface often lie secrets, eerie encounters, and mysteries that defy explanation. These three true stories unravel the creepy underbelly of small-town life, each with a chilling twist and a moral that lingers long after the tale is told. Nestled in the heart of Vermont was the small town of Greystone, surrounded by dense, ancient woods. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and traditions ran deep. But the woods had a reputation. Locals called them the Whispering Woods. Teenagers often dared one another to venture into the forest after sunset, claiming they could hear voices calling their names. Most laughed it off as folklore, but the legend persisted. One summer evening, 17-year-old Ellie decided to prove the stories wrong. Armed with a flashlight and her dog, Max, she ventured into the woods. At first, it was just trees and silence. The air was cool, and the ground was soft with moss. But as she went deeper, the atmosphere changed. The trees seemed to close in, and the silence became oppressive. Then she heard it, a faint whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sound became clearer. It was her name. Ellie. Her heart pounded as she turned in every direction, but there was no one there. Max began to growl, his fur bristling. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. Panicking, Ellie turned back the way she had come, but the path seemed unfamiliar. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices now, each calling her name. Ellie. Ellie. She ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, until she burst out of the woods onto the main road. Breathless and terrified, she looked back to see shadows moving among the trees, though there was no wind. Ellie never went near the woods again. She later learned that the forest was the site of a tragic fire decades ago, where several townsfolk had perished. Some believed their restless spirits remained, whispering warnings to those who dared to enter. Moral: sometimes, legends carry truths that are better left undisturbed. Respect the unknown and trust your instincts. In the quiet town of Meadowville, there stood an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. It had been vacant for years, its windows boarded up, and the yard overgrown with weeds. Children often whispered about seeing a man in the upstairs window, though no one dared to investigate. Jack, a journalist new to the town, was intrigued by the stories. Determined to write a piece on local legends, he decided to spend the night in the house. Armed with a camera, a notebook, and a sleeping bag, Jack entered the house just as the sun was setting. The interior was as creepy as expected: dusty furniture, peeling wallpaper, and an eerie stillness. As night fell, Jack set up his camera and settled in the living room. At first, nothing happened. He almost laughed at how foolish he felt. But around midnight, he heard a soft creak from upstairs. "Probably just the wind," he muttered. But then he heard it again, footsteps, slow and deliberate. Jack's heart raced as he grabbed his flashlight and camera. He climbed the staircase, each step echoing loudly in the silence. At the top of the stairs, he saw the source of the noise, an open door at the end of the hallway. It hadn't been opened before. Summoning his courage, Jack stepped inside. The room was empty, except for an old chair by the window. As he approached, he saw something that made his blood run cold: a single handprint on the dusty glass, fresh and unmistakable. Suddenly, the chair moved. Jack froze, his flashlight flickering. A cold breath brushed his neck, and he turned to see a shadowy figure in the corner. Dropping his flashlight, Jack ran out of the house, leaving his equipment behind. The next morning, when he returned with the police, there was no sign of the figure, but the handprint remained. Moral: curiosity can lead to dangerous places. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. In the Appalachian Mountains, there was a town called Hollow Ridge, known for its close-knit community and beautiful landscapes. But Hollow Ridge had a strange history. Every few decades, the town would seemingly vanish for a day. Locals called it the Silent Day. On that day, no one would leave their homes, and travelers were warned to avoid the area. In 1987, a group of hikers ignored the warnings and ventured into the town on Silent Day. What they found was unnerving. Hollow Ridge was completely deserted. Cars were parked, lights were on, and meals were half-eaten on tables, but there wasn't a single person in sight. The air was heavy and still, and the only sound was the hikers' own footsteps. As they explored, they noticed strange symbols carved into doorframes and trees. One of the hikers, Mark, felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Then, as the sun began to set, they heard it, a low hum, growing louder and more intense. The ground seemed to vibrate, and the air felt charged with electricity. Panicking, the hikers ran for the forest, but the hum followed them. Shadows darted through the trees, and Mark felt something cold brush against his arm. They eventually made it back to their car and sped away. When they returned the next day, the town was back to normal, with people going about their routines as if nothing had happened. When Mark tried to ask about Silent Day, the townsfolk refused to talk, their faces pale with fear. To this day, no one knows what happens in Hollow Ridge during those 24 hours. Moral: respect the traditions and warnings of a community. They often exist for a reason. Small towns may seem peaceful on the surface, but they often harbor secrets that are both fascinating and chilling. These three stories remind us of the importance of caution, curiosity, and respect for the unknown. Sometimes, the quietest places have the loudest whispers of the past.